Pakistan figured out the current playbook in Washington, answered faster than almost anyone else. They realized early on last year when Trump came back to power and started his second, that his administration would be driven by very quick, tangible, almost easy wins. They delivered on that front.
Pakistan is emerging as an increasingly important player far beyond South Asia. From new security partnerships in the Gulf to diplomacy around some of the Middle East's most consequential conflicts, Islamabad is seeking a larger role on the regional stage. But what is driving Pakistan's growing ambitions? How much influence does the country actually have? And can it sustain that role while facing profound challenges at home and a deeply strained relationship with neighboring Afghanistan? In this episode, I speak with Elian Peltier, the New York Times bureau chief for Pakistan and Afghanistan. A conversation about Pakistan's growing regional role, the limits of its power, and what its ambitions could mean for the wider Middle East. Welcome to Focus na Ost. My name is Josephine Herrmann. Pakistan is a country of more than 250 million people, a nuclear-armed state and one of the most consequential military powers in South Asia. For decades, its geopolitical importance has largely been viewed through the lens of its rivalry with India, its complicated relationship with neighboring Afghanistan, and its close strategic partnership with China. But Pakistan is increasingly looking beyond its immediate neighborhood. Islamabad is deepening its security relationships in the Middle East, strengthening its ties with countries including Saudi Arabia and Turkey, rebuilding its relationship with Washington, and seeking a role in some of the region's most consequential diplomatic efforts. That raises a larger question. Is Pakistan becoming a more important power in the Middle East? And if so, why now? Because behind this growing international profile lies a much more complicated reality. Pakistan continues to face severe economic pressure, a violent insurgency in Balochistan, a deeply strained relationship with Afghanistan, and growing pressure on independent journalism. So, how much influence can Islamabad actually exercise? What is driving its growing regional ambitions, and how far can Pakistan's rise go while the country faces such a profound challenge at home? My guest today is Elian Peltier. He is the New York Times bureau chief for Pakistan and Afghanistan and has been based in Islamabad since 2025. He joined the Times in 2017, reporting first from France and later from London and Brussels. In 2022, he moved to Dakar as the paper's West Africa correspondent, reporting from more than 15 countries across Africa before moving to Pakistan. Today, his reporting focuses on Pakistan and neighboring Afghanistan, from geopolitics and economic hardship to the relationships between people and their governments. He has also just returned from a month of reporting in Afghanistan, giving him a particularly timely perspective on the increasingly difficult relationship between the two countries. Elian, you are based in Islamabad and have watched Pakistan's role change quite dramatically over the past year. Not long ago, Pakistan seemed almost peripheral to Washington. Now it has mediated between the US and Iran, cultivated close ties with Donald Trump, and joined Saudi Arabia and Turkey in a new defense pact. From where you sit in Islamabad, does this feel like a genuine geopolitical shift? And what explains Pakistan's remarkable comeback?
Well, thanks for having me, Josephine. For the Pakistani government and the military leadership, it does feel like a shift, a massive one. For the anecdote, I was coming back from Kabul yesterday, and from the Islamabad airport to my place, you go through those very broad highways, avenues, and you now have those massive, large billboards praising the Mecca agreements with the face of Field Marshal Asim Munir, the Pakistani chief of army staff, next to Mohammed bin Salman and President Erdogan of Turkey. And so just that, the fact that Field Marshal Asim Munir is kind of seen or seated next to the likes of MBS or Erdogan does at least on paper signal quite a shift in which Pakistan kind of pivots from being this peripheral, as you said, player to a more central, at least active pillar in South and West Asian diplomacy and security. So it's a massive leap in how they project power and try to project influence. How they're going to exercise it, that's another question. But that's the first. The Pakistan sees it as a first step into something more robust and long term. How they made it happen, I mean, the relationship with the US and President Trump in particular, I think is central to this. Pakistan figured out the current playbook in Washington, I'd say faster than almost anyone else. They realized early on last year when Trump came back to power and started his second term, that his administration would be driven by very quick, tangible, almost easy wins, even much more than during first Trump administration. And they delivered on that front. They delivered quick wins on counterterrorism. They offered deals on crypto and on mining. So they've kind of mastered the art of speaking the language that the Trump administration is the most sensitive to. And then I just add the personal dimension here between President Trump and Field Marshal Steve Winier, who kind of fits this pattern of strong men that or fit into the mold of a strong man that President Trump appreciates or likes to interact with. He's really found quite a perfect partner in South Asia for that, especially at a time when the relationship between the US and India and the Trump-Modi relationship has not been as positive as it used to be. And that it's mostly been because Field Marshal Winier has been credited with helping Pakistan secure a win in the short-lived conflict with India last year. And he's become this statesman and this almost diplomat in chief abroad, making the calls, meeting with the likes of Erdogan, MBS, Trump, of course, while the civilian leadership back home in Pakistan is left dealing with the day-to-day domestic troubles.
Pakistan has managed something very few countries could, maintaining close enough relationships with both Iran and the US to act as an intermediary during the war. Why was Pakistan able to occupy that space, and how much of this diplomacy is about gaining regional influence rather than protecting Pakistan from the consequences of a conflict right next door?
I'd say it's both. I mean, it's like your best attack is your defense, right? So in order to maintain a form of stability, they've been projecting their power and their clout. And a big part of it comes down to timing, I would say, and the stars aligning for Pakistan, mostly thanks to the quiet legwork to cultivate ties with the Trump administration over the past year or so. Field Marshal Winier and President Trump met in May 2025, and after the meeting, Trump said about Pakistan, they know Iran very well. And then last summer 2025, you had some senior American counterterrorism officials flying into Islamabad, sitting down with Pakistani military leaderships, but also with like retired diplomats or think tank analysts, and essentially asking, how can you help us navigate the Iran question? And so we've got to remember that the key players around President Trump have had a pretty thin playbook on Iran's inner workings, and Pakistan in a way has stepped in to fill that knowledge gap. Because of the shared complex bilateral history and bilateral relationship between the two countries, two neighbors. And so longer term, so that's kind of like a short-term patch in a way. And in longer term, it fits right into Washington's broader push towards what's been described as like geopolitical offloading, right? This idea of outsourcing the strategic burden sharing to regional allies like Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, and now like Pakistan. So that's for the US. For Iran, it's a very complicated relationship between the two countries, very layered, long reach, tense history. But Pakistan, first and foremost, did not want to see the regime in Tehran collapse. The economic and the security fallout from that would have been catastrophic. And at the same time, Pakistan was able, maybe more than anyone else, to lend a hand to Iran, which was deeply isolated and needed someone or a channel to get its message out. And Pakistan was one of the very few countries in the room that, in a way, both sides would actually talk to. So yeah, in terms of the motives, I would really say it's both. It's about projecting this regional clouds, and at its core, it's about self-preservation and shielding Pakistan from destabilization right next door by keeping Tehran close to them and by keeping Iran's broader ambition in check as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, Pakistan has just joined Saudi Arabia and Turkey in the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement, under which an armed attack on one is considered an attack on all three. On paper, that sounds remarkably close to NATO's Article 5. What does these three different countries actually want from one another, and how significantly is this agreement really?
Yeah, so they all bring the three countries all bring something different to the table, right? If I stick to Pakistan, it brings military clouds. It's a nuclear power, so in terms of deterrence, it's quite a big player, and it provides a robust umbrella. That's on paper. In reality, I mean, it's hard to assess the significance of it because to assess the significance, the alliance would need to be, quote unquote, tested, right? What happens if something happens? But it does send a really, really strong message, and that message is that these middle powers, the three of them, but also Egypt and others in the region, may have grown tired of waiting on an unpredictable security umbrella that the United States might not be willing or able to provide. And they see those growing threats in the region, both to their own security and to the broader regional landscape. And so they're building what they hope, and we'll see whether it is, that a self-reliant web of alliances or mutual deterrence, so they're not completely at the mercy of decisions that would be made in Washington, or the fallout of a broader, wider regional war.
But I must say the pact also raises an obvious question. Turkey's tension with Israel are escalating over Syria, while Pakistan has its own conflicts and security challenges involving Afghanistan, involving India. If one of those confrontations seriously escalates, what does an attack on one is an attack on all actually mean in practice?
Yeah, again, it's a tough one to answer because I don't think I wouldn't bet on seeing one domino fall after the other if there's provocation here and provocation there. If we take the India-Pakistan tensions, other countries could play a role in mediating, like Saudi Arabia, for instance. And so in a way, if we flip the question, is Saudi Arabia keeping Pakistan's ambitions or Pakistan's hostility towards India in check by also creating this alliance, which would also force Pakistan to refrain from quick-tempered reactions to a move from India. On Saudi Arabia and Pakistan as well, important to remember that the two of them signed a mutual defense agreement last year. And when two ways to see this. First, Saudi Arabia was mostly spared from Iranian fire over the past, has been mostly spared from Iranian fire over the past few months. Yeah. Is that a result of that agreement? Who knows? But we also know that Pakistan has been sending some fighter jets and air defense systems to Saudi Arabia in April, though. So Pakistan took its sweet time to kind of come to Saudi Arabia's rescue. They've really been trying to stay away from it, if I may say. And clearly when they signed the agreement with Saudi Arabia last September, I'd be surprised if they would expect Iran to, go after countries in the Gulf and go after Saudi Arabia. They may have, reconsidered this agreement had they known. But could that go further? It's hard to tell. Pakistan is also facing many domestic security challenges, and its security forces are stretched at home. So I'm not sure it could offer like a broader military umbrella abroad, and I don't think we should expect Pakistan to step into every conflict in West Asia now, or Saudi Arabia to come. Saudi Arabia could come to financially come to the rescue of Pakistan if there was another conflict with India, for instance. But to come back to Pakistan, the Pakistan's actions since the beginning of the Iran conflict are also clear evidence that they may not just like step into a new battlefield and try to show up with weapons if I oversimplify it.
So Pakistan has invested heavily in keeping channels to Tehran open while moving into a much more formal security alignment with Saudi Arabia and Turkey. But can Islamabad credibly sustain both roles? And what happens if the interests of its new partners and Iran begin to collide?
Yeah, I mean, for them, that's the core dilemma, right? There's not going to be a status quo, but Pakistan could do with a status quo when it comes to the relationship with Iran. If Iran remains isolated, if the bilateral relations between Iran and Pakistan kind of like ebb and flow, and if trade between the two countries stays pretty limited, it is at the moment, in a way, we'd be back to, a pre-February 2026 scenario situation. But amid this chaos and instability, Pakistan has also been seeing an opportunity when it comes to the bilateral relationship with Iran, mostly on the economic front. Because if sanctions were to be lifted, Pakistan could trade heavily with Iran. They're next door. There's a huge potential. Iran provides a 90 million market with a significant middle class, need for reconstruction, and so on. So there is an incentive almost in Islamabad to pull Iran into a broader framework of regional integration, to also keep Iran in check, to offer Iran a path out of total isolation, and to benefit from this reintegration, if I may say, of Iran into something bigger. So the potential is there. I guess that's kind of like the North Star really for Pakistan. When that middle ground position has been tested over the past few weeks, over the past few months, what we've seen is that Pakistan kind of like takes the back seat, withdraws a little bit, and then we've seen other players like Oman or Qatar stepping in when it comes to the mediation. But at the end of the day, I don't think that those setbacks have been hurting Pakistan's credibility either. I think, many other countries, including, for instance, in Europe, you had so many foreign ministers calling Pakistan's foreign minister during the crisis. Many of them acknowledge that this is an extremely volatile situation with mostly two, and three, of course, with Israel, but mostly two, the US and Iran, two actors were in a way on a day-to-day basis, highly unpredictable with competing agendas, and Pakistan trying to hold both ends of the rope is not an easy task that I don't think anyone would expect Pakistan to master right away, because maybe no one can.
Elian, you've just spent a month reporting in Afghanistan, so I'm obviously particularly interested in what you saw there. How does Pakistan look from the other side of the border right now? And did your time in Afghanistan maybe change the way you think about Pakistan's power and influence in the region?
So on the first question about how it's seen on the other side of the border, depends which part of the border you ask. If you go east or south of Afghanistan, where support for the Taliban is much stronger, there is a very strong and widespread anti-Pakistan sentiment of Pakistan's behavior from over the past several months. Right before Israel and the United States started bombing Iran, Pakistan started bombing Afghanistan, and what its defense minister declared called an open war. Mostly of the security considerations, right? Pakistan accusing the Taliban administration of hosting or providing a refuge to the Pakistani Taliban, which are distinct from the Afghan Taliban, but they of course share a history and ideological ties. Pakistani Taliban that are now one of Asia's most lethal and deadliest terrorist organizations. So finding refuge in Afghanistan and staging attacks in Pakistan, and so Pakistan has lost patience basically and responded with airstrikes on civilian targets and on military targets. Mostly in the east and the south, also in Kabul to a lesser extent. And so in those regions, the anti-Pakistan sentiment is pretty high. But a few weeks ago, I went north. I went to Badakhshan, which also shares a border with with Pakistan, but which has never really been a Taliban stronghold, to say the least. During the Taliban's first coup between 1996 and 2001, it was the only province that the Taliban never really managed to control. They control it, and now the Taliban have full control of the country. But over the past few weeks, we've seen a resurgence of anti-Taliban attacks from anti-Taliban groups, including in Badakhshan. And in this province of Badakhshan, the sentiment towards Pakistan is quite the opposite to what I just described in the south and east. It's more about it's not like they would openly say, people would openly say that they would welcome a Pakistani intervention in Afghanistan to dislodge the Taliban administration. And there is very high suspicion that those anti-Taliban groups are being supported by Pakistan. And in Badakhshan, the question is not whether, but more to what extent and for how long Pakistan would want to support those groups, and whether they would want to increase the pressure a little bit on the Taliban administration. So it's kind of, and in Kabul as well, among the leadership, it's kind of widely accepted that Pakistan is, if you allow me the expression, cooking something, likely with the support or the tacit acceptance of some foreign partners in the West and in the Gulf. And then the status quo is not going to remain, and that the challenges Taliban's role are going to pile up and be increasingly potentially regime threatening for the Taliban.
But I think there's a striking contrast here, because abroad, Pakistan is presenting itself as a mediator, security partner, and increasingly important regional power. And at home, it faces a struggling economy, a violent insurgency in Balochistan, the conflict with Afghanistan, and growing pressure on journalists. How much does this domestic fragility limit Pakistan's new ambitions? What do you think?
I mean, so first on Afghanistan, whether to what extent Pakistan may be trying to influence the fate of events in Afghanistan, there's a bit of a contradiction here where Pakistan is trying to play peacemaker in the broader region with Iran and so on, and at the same time has basically been waging war or waged a short-lived war in the spring against Afghanistan. The two are very hard to reconcile. And when called out on this, Pakistani officials don't really have an answer. But in terms for the domestic picture, I mean, to me, it's really about the economic situation and how this is the single biggest handbrake on Pakistan's foreign policy ambitions and regional ambitions. It really goes on to the money. Like, Pakistan owes billions in short-term debt to mostly Saudi Arabia and China. You basically have Pakistan officials, primarily Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, having to go every few months to those partners and ask for those loans to be rolled over as kind of emergency band-aids for Pakistan's struggling economy. So that financial vulnerability will, for at least as long as it is here, it will severely undercut Pakistan's diplomatic leverage, which is why the United States, through the IMF and others, the Asian Development Bank as well, have been calling for structural reforms, because Pakistan goes from one IMF program to another and jumps from one loan from the countries I mentioned to another. There was an interesting sequence of events during the negotiations between Iran and the US that the Financial Times Pakistan correspondent Hamza Jilani I thought brilliantly laid out in a story a few weeks ago on Field Marshal Asim Munir, in which he described how right before Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif hosted J.D. Vance and the Iranian leadership in Islamabad, you had the finance minister of Saudi Arabia visit Islamabad and ask for military assistance. And Pakistan sent fighter jets and sent air defense missiles. And then a few days after that, Saudi Arabia gave $3 billion to Pakistan. And so you can look at it, you can look at that cup half full or half empty. On one end, Pakistan has this very powerful, very professional, very structured military and those military capabilities that allow it to punch far above its weight globally, regionally, and secure gains from partners like Saudi Arabia. On the flip side, this extreme economic fragility kind of forces Pakistan to engage in transactional diplomacy where it doesn't really have, or doesn't always have the upper end, just to maintain this kind of precarious domestic stability.
Mm-hmm. I was just wondering, what do people in the country, now mainly in Islamabad where you're based, what do people in the country tell you about their problems, regarding the economic problems in the country at the moment? How did their daily life change? What did they experience?
It's hard to get Pakistani people to speak freely because we're evolving in an increasingly authoritarian system as well, and Pakistan projecting its power as we've been discussing abroad is not doesn't really do for now, hasn't really done much, hasn't delivered on the domestic front. So you can have a very influential or active leadership, but at the end of the day, if the price of gasoline, diesel, petrol, if the price of the food prices is too high because of the war in Iran, like elsewhere, right? But if they can't provide a solution to this, that's at the end of the day what they might be judged on. So the economic troubles are high, people are hurting. It's mostly food prices and gas prices. So Pakistan has, the government has been offering price reliefs, but then it would increase the diesel prices again, and so it's kind of like this back and forth really, and in the meantime the average Pakistaner is hurting.
Mm-hmm. So you've reported on Pakistan's efforts to reshape its image abroad at a time when independent journalism inside the country is under growing pressure. As a correspondent living and reporting there, what do you think outsiders still get wrong about Pakistan, and what would convince you that this really is a lasting geopolitical shift rather than an exceptional moment created by geopolitical crisis?
I'd say, and this might be shaped by my months in Afghanistan, but I'd say the security crisis with Afghanistan is something that maybe some outside may not fully understand, or at least the preoccupation in the depth of the concerns in Pakistan. At the risk of oversimplifying, there is this pervasive attitude coming out of Washington, European capitals, even across the region, of this kind of quote unquote, well, what did you expect, or we told you so, towards Pakistan, because the narrative is that Pakistan supported the Taliban for 2 decades, playing this double game. Then the Taliban, came back to power, and it backfired, and now they just have to deal with it. That's the narrative. And in a way, it is a failed investment by Pakistan on this group, the Taliban, which is now in power, which rules a country of an estimated 45 million people, and which is the main, one of the biggest security threats for Pakistan. That being said, the dismissiveness, and it's not like a full dismissiveness, like people acknowledge the cost, but there is this dismissiveness that underestimates the human cost that we're seeing in Pakistan, where thousands of Pakistani security personnel and civilians have been dying in recent years. And the reality of the ground has become that, is that Pakistan has become one of the most terrorist impacted countries in the world, sustaining the highest, largest losses, and that's a huge national security issue for Pakistan that I'm not sure countries in Saudi Arabia, for instance, realize. On the second part of the question, I'd look at the neighbors. I'd look at Iran and Afghanistan and know what Pakistan is going to do there. On Afghanistan, if Pakistan recycles its old playbook of trying to influence domestic affairs in Afghanistan, if it tries to quote unquote destabilize the Taliban regime, whether it's in Kabul or more likely in Kandahar, where the supreme leader of the Taliban sits, if it kind of plays with fire, if we're being a bit provocative here, and risks even more chaos right next door on its doorstep. Is it going to go with that, or is it going to try to build a more functional long-term containment strategy with Afghanistan? That's the key question. At the same time, they've been trying for years and have kind of like now lost patience. So for me, that will tell us whether Pakistan is now fully aware of its new potential clout and role. And then for Iran, can they sustain this kind of balancing act that they've been playing over the past 6 months or so? Can they continue playing a central role in this new both diplomatic and defense architecture that is being built across West Asia without being a destabilizing force again, which is often how Pakistan has been portrayed? So can they sustain that rather than just stepping in as a kind of firefighter? And I guess that's when we will know whether we'll be looking at a more permanent and structural shift.
Elian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This was a new episode of Focus Nahost with Elian Peltier, the New York Times bureau chief for Pakistan and Afghanistan. If you found this conversation valuable, feel free to share it, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a review. It helps ensure that more people can hear these perspectives. You can also read the full transcript of this interview in my Substack newsletter, where you'll also find further reading and additional resources on the topics we discussed today. And if you're interested in a broader geopolitical shift shaping the Middle East, I also recommend my conversation with Hamid Reza Azizi about Iran, regional diplomacy, and the changing balance of power in the region. I linked the episode in the show notes. My name is Josephine Hermann. Thank you for listening, and I speak to you soon.